past. Who goes there? Hi, this is Chimes Media and I'm James Williams. Okay, what's to follow next after this little introduction will be a conversation I've had with a guy called Robert Wells. It's a conversation, so it bounces around a bit, as conversations tend to, but it's a conversation about the subject of victims of male victims of domestic abuse, and highlights a few of the problems that males find in the greater world and getting support, getting recognition for their problems, and coping and surviving. Robert's had a different experience to myself, who's had an outsider's view of things. Robert himself was a victim himself of domestic abuse, and it's a broad term that's used. But one of the things I wanted to just highlight was that it is a form of prejudice against male victims. I think hopefully it is improving. It's getting more recognition. But when you consider female victims versus male victims, the male victims are very much the poor end of the scale when it comes to support. And there's initial prejudices within the individual victims, and he doesn't like using the word victims, survivors, whatever you like the term is. There are initial prejudices. You think, well, it can't be happening to me because I'm a guy and all that sort of stuff, along with the claim that women cannot abuse men, and that's a sort of very austere Marxist view you get from the radical feminists, and they refuse to accept that men can be victims or can be abused, or because it's down to this sort of narrative of oppressor versus oppressed, and men are the perpetrators, therefore cannot be victims, cannot be oppressed. It's a long conversation, an hour and 35 minutes, hour and a half or so. But what I've done is I've laced it with a number of pictures to make points, and they're not related necessarily to what we're talking about, because as I said, the conversation floats about, but it's just to give some imagery about what we're talking about, some of the issues that are there. There are a couple of pictures in it that are a bit gruesome. I did mention it during the conversation we had, the big gulf, in fact, in terms of funding support between helping male survivors versus female survivors. If you look at the big women's charity, they are big charities. They're up there with Oxfam and that sort of thing. And their CEOs are, on £200,000 a year, and the rest, the biggest, or perhaps the biggest male advocacy group is Mankind Initiative. And by comparison, the whole of that organisation, the Mankind Initiative, gets about less than a quarter of what the CEO for Women's Aid gets as a salary. That's the sort of bit of the comparison of things. And we have to take this more seriously than what we have. Domestic abuse has been going on for yonks. And one of the things actually that I've noticed as well is the use of children. A common thing is that if there are children involved in a relationship and the man leaves for whatever reason, being denied access, whatever it may be, to me, that is domestic abuse. It's using emotional abuse. And the other subject is, which I did a little video, must be about 5-6 years ago now, under the terms of Men's Matters organisation, which I ran. And that was a parental alienation. Now, we don't go into parental alienation too much in this particular conversation. When you start going into abuse victim stuff, it gets kind of very complex. So anyway, after the videos, until next time, take care of yourself. This is Chimes Media and I'm James Williams, and with my wonderful guest, Robert Wells.
Hello, fabulous internet friends. How are we today? Great to meet you, James.
Yeah, great to meet you too.
Thank you for having me.
Well, the shake on
Thank
camera.
you very much. I really appreciate you having me here today.
That's all right, and sorry about the tight conditions here. Not quite Ruben's report, but we're
cosy. Cosy is what we want.
Now, you are you're a campaigner for domestic violence against men, and you're an advocate for that.
I am an advocate.
Yeah.
So an advocate is someone who publicly supports a particular cause, and for me, it's domestic abuse against men.
Right.
People have asked me why it's not just domestic abuse,
Yeah.
and I think it's an important point for me to get across. It's not because I object to any services that are being offered to women.
No.
I absolutely fully support women and everything that is being done to safeguard women and girls. Absolutely 100%.
Yeah.
And I want to make that clear. But why am I an advocate, particularly for men? Well, it's because I feel that men are really not catered for either by the attitudes of the police, the government, legislation. The list goes on, really. You know, men are just not supported in the way that they should be supported.
Yeah, they're expected to put up with things, put up and shut up type stuff, and
yeah, I think, you know, I think it's a societal thing. Society expects men. If you look at the way men are portrayed as far as domestic abuse is concerned online, it's seen very much as a joke.
yes. I've seen that. I've seen that as well. They've done sort of social experiments in parks and things like that. I think Mankind Initiative did a film a few years back and showed that the attitude, the public attitude. In fact, the men being abused, because it was actors being used. The men being abused, they got actually sympathy from women rather than other men.
Yeah, it's only a couple of days ago that I actually posted a very similar experiment that was done by the BBC.
Yes.
Exactly the same, male and a female in a public park. Firstly, the male plays the perpetrator.
Yeah.
He's been aggressive towards her. Lots of people, both men and women, stepping in to protect the woman.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Later on, they role reverse, and it's seen as a joke.
Yeah.
In fact, I think on the one that I showed, only one person in the entire experiment stepped forward
Yes.
to ask the man if he was okay.
Yeah.
Everybody else either filmed it, thought it was a joke, laughed at the guy.
But it's not just in Britain, because I've seen a video done in America and they've got exactly the same reaction.
Yeah, absolutely.
In fact, on one of the occasions where the man's been abused, there was an off-duty sheriff walked past and did nothing. You know,
really,
that was
it doesn't surprise me.
Yeah.
I mean, from my own experiences, the hardest thing for me in all of the years of abuse was actually how I was dealt with by the authorities,
Right.
in particular the police.
Yeah. What happened to you then?
So, I mean, I could sit here and talk for hours about what happened, but in a nutshell, I met a lady, we moved in together, but looking back now, I can see that the isolation tactics and the coercive control, which everyone's talking about now, looking back, I can see it. I can see how I was manoeuvred into a position of isolation. But on every single occasion that I contacted the police, or when neighbours contacted the police, when the police actually turned up, I was immediately treated as the perpetrator.
Yes. Yeah.
Now, I am not bitter towards the police,
No.
because as a military police officer of 13 years, I went to a number of domestic abuse situations, and on not one of those occasions did I ever walk into the house and suspect that the female was the perpetrator and the male was the victim.
No.
It wasn't even on my radar to consider the man as a victim, particularly in the armed services, where ultimately a soldier, his job is ultimately to kill in times of war.
Well, do you think that problem, because it is a problem, do you think that's a problem which is cultural or is endemic in all of us? Is it this sort of male idea to somehow protect the female, therefore the reverse can't be the case or something? You know?
Yeah, I think it is cultural.
Yeah.
I think over generations,
Yes.
It's just been ingrained within us, you know, from an early age, really.
I just wanted to clarify for people who are, you know, not aware of this situation, that when we talk about abuse, we're not just talking about violence. We're talking about a whole range of issues where somebody is being, I don't even call it aggrieved against.
Yeah, occasionally I'll use the word violence.
Yes.
And for me, that's a slip up, because I've tried to steer away from using that word, because you're quite right. It's domestic abuse. That incorporates the violence, coercive control, you know, all the mind games, everything else that goes along with domestic abuse.
Yeah.
You know, so it fits perfectly as an umbrella over everything for me. So I try not to get drawn into using domestic violence.
Yeah, it's interesting because I've been, you know, helped out in the past many men who've been separated from their children, and I came to the conclusion except when it was obvious that he was not a nice guy, which in most cases it wasn't the situation.
Yeah.
But when he was being excluded from his children or being messed about with, I saw that as a form of domestic abuse, because there was an emotional abuse, not just against him for depriving to see his children, but also against the children themselves. But that, again, is not recognised as a normal domestic abuse. And yet, if you look into I don't know if it is now, the definition, that can be included in that as a form of abuse. But a lot of men and women don't realise that actually is domestic abuse itself.
Well, I don't think there's any doubt that where children are being used to manipulate the other person, that is a form of abuse. Under the current legislation, I don't think that's included.
No.
I have to be honest, since the government released the latest paper, it's almost 200 pages long, and since it was released, I've just been so flat out busy that I've not had a chance to read through it. I think I'm now up to page 30 something or other.
Yeah, what sort of thing does it sort of relate to? Does it?
Well, it covers all areas of domestic abuse.
Yeah.
It's been classed as a once in a generation document.
Yeah.
But from Twitter and LinkedIn, people that are involved with domestic abuse, they are saying, particularly where it involves finances, it's not gone far enough. Because I haven't had a chance to read the whole document and highlight certain points from it, it's probably not best for me to speculate on what's in it. But
and what's? Can you remember the name of the paper that it's called? What was it? The title of it? Because perhaps people online might like to check up on it themselves.
I'll come back to you with
that. Okay.
I'll come back to you. I do have it.
Links in the bottom of the description.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we'll put a link in for that one. But if you've got the time to read through it, certainly for me, it's an essential piece of reading.
Yeah.
But I've had so many meetings since I became an advocate. Things have just got absolutely crazy. I do have a full-time job as well, so it's just trying to prioritise and fit everything in, really.
Yes, I mean, I remember years ago I went to it was a parliamentary committee meeting, or say it was open to the public, and one of the things they concentrate on separation issues. This was as much as anything else, that a lot of it was due to financial problems that tore the couples apart. So it wasn't a case of stopped loving each other. It was a case of weren't paying the bills or spending too much, and that grew into something bigger and ended up with splits. And of course, if you get separations, it's you're lucky if it's a parting which is silent. There's bound to be some kind of problem with the actual separation, but that can invite domestic abuse. And if someone feels embittered, they could just say, "Well, you shouted at me." And even that can be classed as domestic abuse nowadays. It's a kind of a very loose definition.
Although the government has obviously outlined its definition of domestic abuse and the actions within that are classed as abuse. I think we can all accept that there are other things outside those parameters. It is very broad now. I mean, I think I was saying to my partner the other day, I've got a wonderful partner now and a fantastic woman, and we were talking about this the other day, and I was saying, actually, do you know what? If you sit down and look back through your life at your actions, how many of us can actually say that we didn't do something that would now be classed under the current law as abusive? Certainly in my first marriage, when I was in the army, I met my first wife when I was incredibly young, 15, childhood sweethearts. We got married. And when I was in the army, all I was really interested in doing was going out drinking, chasing girls. Since then, I mean, obviously we got divorced after 13 years, I think. I look back at my behaviour back then and it horrifies me. And I have since apologised to her on multiple occasions.
Yeah, but is that not you just being a human being?
Well, not really, no, because I was married to her, I made commitments to her, and I was out with the lads getting drunk and chasing other women. And she knew about that, and she would have been incredibly hurt, and it would have put her under a huge amount of stress. And it's only been really quite recently where I've been able to look back at that and go, do you know what? What an asshole I was.